In the kingdom of Dolgaria, there was a highly esteemed royal family. The king's name was Duke Riggus. On a very hot afternoon, the king summoned his son, Thor Riggus, to inform him that he was to be sent to another territory as a hostage. Thor was extremely shocked upon hearing this and was very confused as to why he was to be made a hostage in another territory. Duke Riggus answered that Thor was useless. Thor did not have the skills to fight, and he could not inherit the throne of the kingdom of Dolgaria. On the other hand, one of his father's soldiers said that Thor had magical powers, but they had never seen these powers from Thor. Regardless, Thor was truly upset and resolved not to have any relation with Duke's family. However, he defended himself in front of his father. He said that although he did not have the strength to fight, he had the power of alchemy. According to Thor, this power was useful for controlling and repairing the items in the kingdom. Duke Riggus was angry and ordered Thor to stop talking, because according to Duke, that power was still useless. Moreover, the kingdom of Dolgaria already had a sacred sword, which was very powerful, so what was the need to create new items? Duke firmly emphasized that this was a final decision. Thor finally asked where he would be exiled. Duke replied that this place was dangerous. No one ever returned once they were sent there. Thor guessed Demon's King territory, and Duke answered yes. It turned out that the kingdom of Dolgaria had made an agreement with the demons to send a hostage to be sacrificed every decade to keep the demons calm. Thor was shocked. In a state of shock, he was pushed by his father toward the carriage that was ready to take him to the Demon's King territory. Thor shouted, "Duke Balder Riggus, I hate you." His father replied, "You're a dead man. I don't talk to dead men." Thor then reflected in the carriage during his journey to the Demon's King territory. The place he was heading to was the territory of the demons and jinn who had once been enemies of humanity. 100 years ago, the demons and humans had fought to gain the territory of Taikoku. At the end of that war, it was decided that the southern territory of Taikoku would be the boundary for humans, and the northern territory would be for the demons and jinn. Thor sat in the horse-drawn carriage, eyes closed in contemplation. The rhythmic pounding of the soldiers' footsteps accompanying him to the Demon's King territory filled the air. Amidst the silence, Thor sat cross-legged, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts about past events. He pondered the reasons he wanted nothing to do with the kingdom. He had once taken a test to work in the royal office and eventually passed, becoming responsible for organizing documents and repairing items. Despite the scorn from other divisions and the meager salary, Thor loved his previous job because it allowed him to freely use his alchemy skills at work. Thor suddenly clenched his fists, still seething and haunted by his father's words, "You're a dead man." He calmed himself and picked up 3 spoons in front of him. To his surprise, with a wave of his hand, the spoons melted. Thor felt elated and very confident that this was his alchemy ability, allowing him to create new items by altering materials like the metal from the spoons. Thor saw a future beyond this. He was determined that he would not die like this. He would not give up so easily once he reached the Demon's King territory. He was resolute not to surrender even when facing threats in the Demon King's realm. He aspired to hold workshops on his alchemy abilities and become a renowned alchemist. Suddenly, a soldier from outside shouted that they were almost at the Demon's King territory and advised Thor to be careful. Finally, they arrived at the Demon's King territory. The carriage door, previously closed, was opened by a soldier. At that moment, Thor saw many soldiers ready to escort him to the demons and jinn. It turned out that the journey was not yet over. They had to walk a bit further to reach the border between human life and the realm of demons and jinn. The atmosphere was tense as demons and jinn began to emerge from the northern side. Thor felt fear, his face displaying a desperate expression with wide eyes. The demons and jinn approached Thor's group with terrifying faces. Their appearances varied widely. Some had horns, while others were as beautiful as humans. Thor muttered to himself as he observed one of the jinn. "I saw it for the first time, an actual minotaur." However, when he saw one of the terrifying women among the demons and jinn, he whispered, "Is that an elf?" The soldiers from the Dolgarian kingdom shivered as they looked at the demons and jinn. They shouted, "Wait," as Thor began to approach the demons and jinn. Thor took a deep breath, gathering courage within himself. Despite the overwhelming fear, he remembered his noble purpose. In Thor's mind, he had to make a good first impression. He introduced himself to the demons and jinn, placing his right hand over his left chest and said, "I'm from the Dolgarian Empire. My name is Thor Riggus." However, he harbored a bad idea. After this introduction, he needed to find a moment to escape and make the soldiers drop their guard. Contrary to his expectations, Thor received a warm welcome from the Demon King's representatives. "Welcome to the Demon King's territory, Thor Riggus. My name is Mabel, Refrain, an elf. I have come to pick you up in the name of His Majesty the Demon King," Mabel said. Thor's eyes widened in surprise. To its astonishment, the many demons and jinn bowed low, placing their right hands over their left chests in a gesture of respect. The demons and jinn were incredibly polite, showing no signs of hostility toward a captive. The soldiers looked panicked, exclaiming, "It's a trap." To approach a demi-human without a weapon. Meanwhile, Thor tried to reassure them, saying that the demons and jinn were very welcoming to the soldiers as well. The soldiers shouted back, informing Thor of the harsh reality. The elf race is a magician race who can blow away more than a dozen people with a single blow. Minotaurs have superhuman strength. They can easily crush the head of a normal person. They insisted that being near such creatures was genuinely dangerous and sheer madness. Thor furrowed his brow, internally questioning the soldiers who had locked him in the carriage throughout the journey and hadn't even tried to converse with him. He decided it would be better if the demons and jinn didn't listen to the soldiers. With a puzzled expression, Thor asked the soldiers, "What do you mean by those things?" Then turned his attention back to the elf. Thor spoke to Mabel, the elf. "I'm grateful to you." With a humble expression, Mabel replied, "I apologize for the inconvenience." Thor continued his introduction, stating that he was the eldest son of Duke Riggus, the king of the Dolgarian kingdom. He explained that by royal decree, he would accompany the residents of the Demon King's territory. He then asked, "I'm sorry for asking, but can you tell me where the Demon King's territory is?" The moment was silent for a few seconds. Then Mabel responded with a delighted and enthusiastic expression, "It's the first time I've received such a polite greeting from the Empire. The Demon King's territory is north from here." Before Mabel led Thor into the realm of the demons and jinn, Thor was required to sign a document. After signing it, the soldiers happily left the border area, exclaiming, "We'll be killed. Hurry up and run." Thor furrowed his brow in irritation. He took a deep breath to calm himself. Then Mabel asked if Thor felt scared since it was his first time meeting non-humans, but there was no fear among them. Thor admitted that he was indeed afraid, but the Minotaurs welcomed him as a guest and even helped him up when he stumbled on a small hill. Thor compared the kindness of the soldiers to that of the Demon King's inhabitants. The difference felt as vast as night and day. On the other hand, Thor noticed a change within himself. He felt a mysterious magical power. It turned out his alchemy skills were drastically enhanced in this realm. He realized why he lacked combat skills. He had developed his expertise in alchemy. However, Mabel warned Thor that he might feel pain because the magical power in the Demon King's realm was different from that in the human world. In the human world, the attribute of light magic was strong, but in the Demon King's realm, it was weak. Conversely, the attribute of dark magic was strong in the Demon King's realm. This was why Thor hadn't access to dark magic in the human world. By entering the Demon King's territory, Thor's alchemy abilities awakened, granting him access to 6 magic power attributes: light, darkness, earth, water, fire, and wind. Mabel and Thor continued their journey to the Demon King's territory. The path they traversed was filled with small hills and many rocks. The group moved cautiously through the rugged terrain. Suddenly, the rock that Mabel stepped on gave way, causing her pendant to fall and break. Mabel felt a wave of panic and fear as she saw the pendant lying cracked on the ground. She paused to pick it up, her emotions swirling. The pendant was a precious gift from her mother, and she was deeply saddened by its damage. Blaming anyone for the mishap wouldn't restore the pendant to its original state. Thor offered to try and repair the pendant. Although his alchemy skills were never valued in the Dolgarian kingdom, he believed in himself as an alchemist. He pondered the thought, what if I become an alchemist in the Demon King's territory? Without hesitation, Thor asked for permission from the demons, jinn, and especially Mabel to fix the pendant. They all agreed, and Mabel pleaded earnestly as the pendant was very precious to her. Thor assured Mabel that he understood her feelings, saying, "I understand," while clenching his fist. In an instant, Thor managed to repair the pendant using his alchemy skills. Mabel was astonished, her mouth agape as she asked, "It's fixed." The demons were equally amazed, exclaiming, "How is it so beautiful, even though nothing was used but magic power?" Thor was surprised by their reaction as he thought what he did was ordinary, something even Minotaurs could probably do. Thor handed the pendant back to Mabel. With a beaming face, Mabel thanked Thor profusely. The Minotaurs also praised Thor's ability, expressing their happiness that he had been sent to the Demon King's territory because his alchemy skills were greatly needed. Thor felt a sense of pride for the first time, being praised and appreciated for his abilities. He recalled how, in his kingdom, where he was born and raised, he was ridiculed and his skills were dismissed. He was even deemed useless by his own father. Thor felt grateful for coming to the Demon King's territory. Historical texts reveal that many alchemists of old could create magical items such as sacred swords and other artifacts. This marked the beginning of Thor's new life as an alchemist. As far as the eye could see, Thor beheld vast expanses of lush farmland. Still on his journey to the Demon King's territory, Thor marveled at the scenery from his horse-drawn carriage. He thought to himself, "Is this the Demon King's territory?" He was amazed. Besides the sprawling fields of grass, he saw a large lake with ships coming and going. To his astonishment, the people on the ships were fishmen. Their bodies were large and muscular, but their heads resembled fish with fins on top. He also saw beautiful mermaids, bears working to lift hay, and sheep drinking water. Thor was in awe of it all and said there are different kinds of demi-humans. In his kingdom, yes, the Dolgarian kingdom, they depicted the Demon King's territory as a chaotic and messy place. They described the brutality of the Demon King's territory, saying, if you step into the Demon King's territory, a demon beast will attack you or someone will kidnap you. But in reality, those were just words. The beings living in the Demon King's territory seemed normal, even more peaceful compared to the kingdom. Mabel explained that the creatures in the Demon King's territory had to do their best in what they did because the population here was small. Thor nodded, saying, I see. Mabel then added, I'm thinking that I would like Thor to do a good job in the Demon King's territory. Thor was taken aback by her statement. Feeling awkward, he replied, Me? That's right. His words and thoughts were out of sync, thinking, a good job. I was ordered to be a hostage in the Demon King's territory. Thor grew more curious about what was truly happening in the Demon King's territory. He was confused because the kingdom's portrayal and the reality of the Demon King's territory were so different. Thor then asked Mabel about the fate of the people previously sent from the kingdom to the Demon King's territory. It turned out that the last time people were sent from the kingdom to the Demon King's territory was 50 years ago, and Mabel wasn't born then. The coachman, who was driving their carriage, told Mabel about it. Mabel then asked Thor, did you hear anything about it when you came here? She explained that the Demon King's side never prohibited anyone, but those people usually left secretly. In the Demon King's territory, newcomers were treated as guests. The inhabitants of the Demon King's territory were very welcoming to humans. On the other hand, the Dolgarian kingdom believed that those sent there were held hostage and tried to escape. In reality, those people didn't inform the kingdom about their lives, so the kingdom assumed they were missing. Fearful of losing him, Mabel asked Thor, is Mr. Thor leaving the Demon King's territory? Thor was surprised and said, Mabel tried to persuade Thor to stay by holding his hand, emphasizing that there were no other alchemists like Thor. She also promised to help Thor live comfortably in the Demon King's territory and sought to bring peace between the Dolgarian kingdom and the Demon King's territory. Thor was moved by Mabel's efforts. Though he had considered escaping, he realized that Mabel gave him the opportunity to become an alchemist. He felt grateful to Mabel and vowed not to disappoint her. Thor responded to Mabel's efforts by saying, I'm going to do what I can for this country while I'm in the Demon King's territory. Mabel, overjoyed, thanked Thor. In no time, an hour passed, and Thor, Mabel, and their entourage arrived at the Demon King's castle. Mabel reminded Thor to prepare himself. Thor was extremely nervous, thinking about the cruel Demon King and all the stories he had heard from the kingdom. Finally, the hour passed, and they arrived at the Demon King's castle. The Minotaurs and Mabel were very cheerful. They invited Thor to enter the castle and meet the Demon King. They bowed deeply as they awaited the Demon King's arrival. Inside the grand castle, with its massive columns supporting the majestic structure, Thor's nervousness couldn't be contained as he awaited the Demon King. The sound of the Demon King's footsteps grew closer. Indeed, the Demon King Ruki had arrived before Thor. The Demon King immediately asked Thor, are you the guest from the Empire? And introduced himself. I'm the Demon King Ruki Evergard. Thor kept his head bowed, took a step forward, and introduced himself, saying, I'm Thor Riggus, a guest from the Dolgarian Empire. The Demon King, sitting on his grand throne, immediately cut to the chase with Thor. He asked what Thor could offer to the Demon King's territory. Typically, when the Duke's family sent someone, it was someone with significant skills or knowledge. With a slight sheen of nervous sweat, Thor replied, I know a little alchemy. I was thinking about it before I came here. Intrigued, the Demon King and Thor began to negotiate. Thor expressed his desire to become an alchemist in the Demon King's territory. The Demon King burst into hearty laughter, finding Thor's proposal fascinating. The Prime Minister named Curve also agreed with Thor's request, noting that no alchemists currently resided in their domain. Thor felt a whirlwind of emotions, astonishment, joy, and disbelief. His request had been swiftly granted by the highest authorities in the Demon King's territory. His dream was coming true. Thor envisioned establishing an alchemy workshop, something he had longed for since being cast out of his birthplace, the Dolgarian kingdom. Here, he would be a revered alchemist. The Demon King promised to provide everything Thor needed, including a room close to the workshop. To Thor's amazement, his request for alchemical equipment was also promptly approved by the Demon King. It became clear that the Demon King had an ulterior motive. He wanted Thor to create high-quality, mass-producible items that could benefit the residents of the Demon King's territory. Thor agreed but remained curious about the Demon King's ultimate goal. He finally asked, "Why are you doing this? Thank you very much for your kindness, but I'm a stranger from the Empire. I don't understand why your majesty would do this." The Demon King took a deep breath before answering. "It's in order to learn." Thor was puzzled, prompting the Demon King to explain further. 100 years ago, demons were attacked by humans following policies and actions initiated by a hero from another world. This hero, summoned to battle the demons, wielded incredible power, instilling fear in the demons. The hero's obsession with becoming the strongest influenced the humans of this world, spreading the belief that strength was everything. Ultimately, the humans defeated the demons, forcing them to reside in the northern regions. The Demon King continued, explaining that although the practice of summoning heroes for war had ceased, the knowledge and artifacts from those heroes remained. Thor pointed out that these events occurred 200 years ago. The Demon King, unbothered by the passage of time, emphasized that the demons had accepted their past defeat and continually strived to learn and improve. This desire to learn was why they invited guests from the Dolgarian kingdom. It was their way of catching up with humans. Moved by the Demon King's explanation, Thor promised to use his alchemical skills to help the residents. With the encouragement and support from the inhabitants of the Demon King's territory, Thor felt confident he could succeed. The Demon King expressed his hopes, saying, "I'll rely on you, Thor Riggus." In the midst of their engaging conversation, Mabel suddenly reminded the Demon King that Thor needed rest after his long journey. The Demon King agreed, and Thor was escorted to his room by the demons. Now all the officials from the Demon King's territory gathered in the castle hall. With the magnificent castle rising, the Demon King led this meeting while seated on his throne. The meeting was attended by the Prime Minister, commanders of the Minotaurs, commanders of the Lizardmen, and commanders of the Elves. The meeting began with the Prime Minister stating, "We'll be talking about Thor Riggus, our new guest from the Empire." And the Demon King emphasized that the meeting participants should not do anything harmful to Thor. All meeting participants responded loudly, "Yes." However, suddenly the elf commander expressed his thoughts that Thor should also be reminded of the power possessed by the Demon King's territory, showing how dangerous this territory is. With wide eyes and hands on his throne, the Demon King agreed to the suggestion. He believed it was an opportunity to showcase the power and magic power present in the Demon King's territory. But suddenly, the Demon King reconsidered his decision. If the demons were to display their strength to humans, it would be excessive. In the past, demons and jinn almost perished because their ancestors were too careless. And in fact, many humans have more power than demons. This has been proven by the expansion of the kingdom's territorial lines, which have become more extensive and developed. The elf commander felt guilty about his suggestion and he apologized. Then the Demon King reiterated that Thor Riggus was their guest in the Demon King's territory. Thor would report as an alchemist, and if Prime Minister Curve's assessment of Thor's performance was good, then the officials and residents of the Demon King's territory should learn about the culture and technology from the Empire. Everyone in the castle responded loudly, saying, "Yes, sir." Prime Minister Curve responded that he would be ready to carry out each and every noble order of the Demon King. However, he reminded everyone that Thor was still a human. Therefore, it was only appropriate for the residents of the Demon King's territory to remain cautious of Thor. And the Demon King agreed with Curve's suggestion, instructing Mabel to supervise Thor. In the meantime, Curve noticed the pendant that Mabel was wearing, and Curve asked, "Isn't Thor the one who had the pendant repaired?" Mabel responded with a cheerful smile, saying, "Yes." The Demon King also realized that the pendant Mabel was wearing was a water spirit stone with magic, and he asked, "Did he generate magic silver without material?" Curve was curious, so he finally held the pendant to check if it was still genuine or not. Curve inspected the pendant with a bit of sweat due to his surprise at what he found. Curve then asked if the pendant was Mabel's mother's. Of course, Mabel answered yes, and even more surprising was that it was indeed the original pendant, Mabel's mother's pendant, which was once damaged but was now restored. Instantly, the creatures attending the meeting widened their eyes in astonishment. Prime Minister Curve lifted Mabel's sacred water spirit pendant and said, "This water spirit stone can't be fixed in the Demon King's territory with its current technology." But it seems that Thor Dono had really repaired it. Mabel was extremely amazed to hear this statement. She couldn't believe how great Thor was. On the other hand, Curve speculated about Thor's arrival in the Demon King's territory. His first guess was that an alchemist capable of repairing magic items still existed, and the second guess was that there were still many alchemists in the Empire whose level exceeded Thor's. The Demon King then said, "I already knew. There's no way the Empire would just hand us him over without anything in mind." Curve responded, "If so, we can also take it as a form of threat by the Empire." meaning that if there's a large amount of alchemists, just like Thor Riggus, resistance against the Empire is futile. The elf and lizardman commanders showed cold sweat on their faces. Curve then presented his third speculation. The kingdom was quite foolish for not knowing about Thor's abilities. The Demon King immediately shouted, reminding Curve not to underestimate the kingdom. Curve apologized, saying, "Yes, my deepest apologies, your majesty." He also reminded everyone to continue to be cautious of Thor because he was, after all, a human, a creature different from them. Now Mabel headed to Thor's room to check on him. Upon arriving, she apologized for keeping Thor waiting. Thor, who was looking around his room, was startled. Then Mabel asked Thor if anything in the room caught his interest. Thor replied that he was interested in everything here. He showed which items intrigued him. He was particularly fond of the materials in the room. While Thor and Mabel were chatting, lizardmen arrived, instructed to be Thor's bodyguards. The lizardmen came unarmed. Thor seemed insignificant compared to the lizardmen's claws. However, Mabel said that this would make Thor uncomfortable. Thor agreed with Mabel's statement and also felt that it was enough to be accompanied by Mabel alone. He promised to make the lizardmen feel safe. In this new place, the Demon King's territory, Thor felt he had much to learn. Mabel agreed with Thor's statement, and she also mentioned that it was her first time meeting lizardmen. Mabel was surprised when she saw the lizardmen, and it was also the first time she saw humans calling lizardmen by their name. Thor explained that it was normal for humans to always call them lizardmen or reptilemen. Mabel replied, "I see." Thor wondered how the lizardmen changed their clothes. Perhaps they would have difficulty. Mabel was surprised that Thor had thought about that. This was Thor's chance to showcase his abilities. He was determined to make soft and comfortable clothes for the residents of the Demon King's territory. With the diversity of races, tribes, and forms in the Demon King's territory, Thor dreamed of creating an item that could help them solve their problems. Mabel was extremely impressed by Thor's nature and dream of helping the residents of the Demon King's territory. She offered herself to Thor if he needed help. Mabel would gladly assist him. "I can't believe there's an elf who can't use magic." Another elf added that it's because this elf has impure human blood mixed in. The third elf asked if this elf was part of them. The three elves laughed at him disgustingly and told him to leave. This was the recurring nightmare that Mabel always had when she slept. The trauma she endured as a child still haunted her to this day. She often received these nightmares. Mabel hoped that someday she could heal from her trauma. When getting out of bed, Mabel held onto both of her legs. As usual, her feet were as cold as ice. This happened whenever she remembered her trauma, her feet turned as cold as ice. Mabel truly hoped that her sensitivity to trauma would disappear so her feet wouldn't turn cold anymore. When this happened, the only thing she could do was wear socks. Mabel hoped Thor wouldn't feel uncomfortable seeing her wearing socks in front of him. Meanwhile, Thor was enjoying the facilities provided by the Demon King. His room was filled with tools and materials he needed. Many items were scattered on the floor. On the other hand, Thor thought, and looking at these items, he was very grateful that the Demon King had lent him this room. This was in anticipation of Thor's inability to fulfill their expectations for the Demon King's territory. If Thor couldn't meet their expectations, he had to be prepared to be expelled. Therefore, Thor was determined to create something extraordinary for the residents of the Demon King's territory. Thor started by looking at the materials provided by the Demon King. He looked while estimating which materials he could use. As he was browsing through the materials, he suddenly found a book. Thor felt like he had never seen a book like this before, and he thought that this might be a book about the tales of heroes from another world. But when he opened it, the book contained offers for goods. There were prices and the uses of the promoted items. Thor felt that this was a cool book and it was only available here. But Thor didn't understand some of the contents of this book because it was in a foreign language. Thor continued to look through the contents of the book. Page by page, he looked, until he realized that this was an e-commerce catalog, where this book contained a collection of good items with unlimited delivery to Nihon. And it was also explained that Nihon was the country of heroes. Without hesitation, this was a book intended for heroes, and he thought that perhaps it was the items in this book that made the heroes strong. And sure enough, there were cool items like glasses that could give the sensation of 10 hours of sleep, even though he only slept for 2 hours. With this, Thor became even more excited to create cool and amazing items like those in the book. Suddenly, Mabel entered Thor's room, startling Thor, who was deeply engrossed in reading the book. Mabel apologized for startling Thor by suddenly entering his room. Since a while ago, Mabel had been knocking on Thor's door, but there was no answer. Mabel brought tea for Thor. Thor accepted Mabel's arrival and asked about the book he was reading. Thor asked if Mabel understood some of the sentences in the book. Mabel placed her hand on her chin, thinking and confused about what was meant in the book. Mabel gave up and apologized that she couldn't understand what was meant on that page. Mabel thought that from time to time, items like this would only end up in the warehouse, because the demon kings from previous generations, when they found useful items, would always place them in the warehouse. Mabel changed the topic by asking about the tea she brought just now. Thor thanked her for making the tea. While drinking the tea, Thor noticed the socks worn by Mabel. Mabel immediately noticed it, and she explained that it was due to her sensitivity to the cold, and the doctor said it was because the mana circulation in her body didn't work properly. Thor asked, "The mana flow in your body?" "I've never heard of such a case." Mabel explained that her mana body circulation was very poor, which was why Mabel couldn't use her magic powers even though the elves each had their own magic power. Perhaps this also had to do with Mabel's grandmother being a human. "Fortunately, I have the ability to clean," so the Demon King allowed Mabel to enter the castle. Thor, upon hearing the story, felt sad, because it turns out Mabel has been living a difficult life all this time. And Mabel felt it was okay to go through all this because she also didn't think about being able to use magic powers or magic items. Mabel was more concerned about why her relationship with her grandmother was so bad. That's why when Mabel first met Thor, she was very happy, because Mabel was interested in her grandmother's race. And Mabel was grateful when she met Thor, who was the first human she met, because Thor was very kind, just like her grandmother's race, who were also good humans. With an awkward feeling and a small laugh, Thor thanked Mabel. And anyway, Thor thought that the Demon King's territory was really great with its rules that brought people from different regions together, and allowed them to work according to their abilities. Thor then asked Mabel if she was willing to join Thor for an experiment. In the book Thor found earlier, there was an item called a foot bath. The purpose of this item is for people who are sensitive to cold. This item is like a tub with enough space for both feet and a beautiful shape in front of it. By using this item, one can always warm up the body and stimulate acupuncture points on the feet. And ultimately, it leads to comfort. Thor thought about what materials he would need to make this item. He thought that he would need fire magic stone and wind magic stone. With these two materials, Thor attempted to make the foot bath. Not long after, Mabel came carrying a fresh tub. Mabel was so surprised that Thor's tool was already 50% complete. With an excited face, Mabel gave the fresh tub she brought so that Thor could continue working on the item. The purpose of the fire magic stone is to warm the feet, while the wind magic stone is used to increase vibration on the feet. Shortly after, Thor's Alchemist-style foot bath was finished. Thor identified the strengths and weaknesses of this first item he made. This item uses fire, water, and wind materials. When cleaning this item, it must be done with clean water and not detergent, and its estimated usage time is about 25 years. After that, Thor gave the item to Mabel to help with her often cold feet. How happy and surprised Mabel was, Thor completed the item in just 10 minutes. And Mabel asked if all the alchemists in the kingdom were like Thor. Thor answered that he didn't know, but his father always said that there were many alchemists who were on par with Thor and could make more advanced tools or items than him. But whatever it was, Thor managed to create a replica of an item from the hero's world. And Mabel asked Thor to teach her how to use the item. Thor asked for a place with water, and he would teach Mabel how to use the item. Thor began the tutorial on how to use the foot bath. Suddenly, Prime Minister Curve appeared. Thor, surprised, asked what Curve was doing. Curve replied that he couldn't help but wanted to see the item Thor had made. In Thor's mind, he thought it would be even better if many people saw him experimenting with the item he had made. The tutorial began with Thor pouring water into the foot bath. Then he poured mana onto the fire magic stone and waited a few minutes. When it started to smoke, indicating that the water inside the foot bath was hot. Now Mabel put both of her feet into the foot bath. Mabel responded, "Oh, okay." She took off her socks and began to put her feet into the foot bath. Mabel felt the warmth on her feet and also felt the wind in front of the tub. Shortly after, vibrations began to emanate from the item and hua. Mabel felt ticklish, as if her body wanted to jump out in the foot bath. Mabel felt amazing. She felt her body getting better and warmer. She felt like she was in heaven. Mabel truly enjoyed it. Curve asked, "Mabel, are you okay?" Mabel replied that she was fine, and it seemed like the mana circulation in her body was improving. Curve asked Thor if what he made was healthy goods, and Thor nodded. Curve explained that as far as he knew, no heroes use healthy goods. So why did Thor influence Mabel to use the item for her mana? Not stopping there, Thor tried to defend his opinion. He said that heroes are beings with immense mana and power, so do they only have healthy goods? Curve was very confused, as it was unlikely that anyone in the Demon King's territory could heal Mabel's mana circulation, not even psychiatrists. And now, with these healthy goods, Mabel could recover. Curve was truly astonished. Mabel suggested stopping the foot bath experiment. She felt truly refreshed, and the mana circulation in her body had returned. She was advised to try using her magic power. At first, Mabel felt incapable because she hadn't used her abilities in a long time. But suddenly, as she attempted to summon her magic by uttering dark wind, to her surprise, gusts of wind appeared. Thor and Curve were extremely astonished. Mabel was shocked that her magic ability could manifest from her hands. Thor inquired about Mabel's condition. Mabel couldn't believe it. Even though she had always been called useless, now that was no longer the case. She could use her magic power with her hands. Mabel felt incredibly happy. She thanked Thor and hugged him tightly. She recounted how she had always feared she would never be able to use her magic power. People in her village always taunted her, saying that Mabel was an elf without magic power. But now, thanks to Thor, Mabel could use her magic power to help many people. Thor was Mabel's savior. Thor felt breathless from Mabel's tight hug. Then Thor asked if only Mabel's mana circulation had improved. Mabel replied that not only had her mana circulation improved, but the sensitivity to cold in her feet had also healed. However, suddenly, Curve stated that the footbath must be confiscated by the leaders of the Demon King's territory. Thor was shocked, exclaiming, and trying to defend the item he had made. He said that this item was made to help with Mabel's issues. Curve said that if Mabel wanted to use the item, she could just ask, and she would be allowed to use it. However, it should be noted that this item could awaken someone's magic power, so what would happen if it fell into the wrong hands? Reluctantly, Thor had to hand over the item to Curve. Curve said he would buy the item at a fair price. Thor was surprised. Everything he had made would be paid for. In contrast, in the kingdom, he was not allowed to use his alchemist abilities. Finally, Thor asked for magic stones as a reward. Curve was puzzled because with magic stones, Thor could use weapons. Thor agreed and also said that with those magic stones, he could create items he desired, which would then be used by the residents of the Demon King's territory. Curve questioned Thor if he wasn't afraid that the items he would make would be used by the non-human residents of the Demon King's territory. Thor allowed it because ultimately he just enjoyed the response from people benefiting from the items he made. Curve and Mabel were truly surprised by Thor's response. Curve concluded the conversation by saying, "I'll negotiate with the Demon King." Demon King shouted so loudly upon hearing the news from Curve. He couldn't believe that Mabel, who had been undergoing treatment for so long with the psychiatrists in the Demon King's territory without any improvement, was now cured by Thor Riggus, who had only been in the Demon King's territory for a day. Curve explained how Mabel was cured. He said that Thor made a device called the footbath. This device was made using a fire magic stone to heat the water and a wind magic stone to create vibration and bubbles. Demon King remained highly skeptical upon hearing this. How could Thor dissolve both the fire magic stone and the wind magic stone? He tried to provide another explanation, suggesting that because Mabel was an elf with a water attribute, her mana circulation could easily dissolve in water. And not only was Mabel's mana circulation healed, but her sensitivity to cold was also cured. Demon King became even more impressed and amazed that Thor was an alchemist who could be counted on one hand in the world. He could even replicate items from the lives of past heroes. In history, healthy goods were not written to improve mana circulation, yet Thor could prove it directly. With these events, Kurt became afraid, feeling insecure about being the prime minister who would inherit the history of the Demon King's territory. After hearing about the benefits of the footbath for Mabel, Demon King instructed Curve to give the item to Mabel, because according to Demon King, the item was very important to Mabel. But Curve had a different opinion. According to Curve, Mabel seemed to trust Thor very much, even though Thor was a stranger, especially being a human. Demon King was shocked by Curve's words, because according to Demon King, Mabel had already suffered enough. From being ridiculed by the villagers for not being able to use her magic power to being in the castle, so the residents of the castle should accept and trust Mabel. Finally, Curve gave advice and a request for this issue, that Mabel should marry Thor, because that way Thor would have a reason to stay in the Demon King's territory. Demon King was extremely angry upon hearing this. Curve's body trembled and he began to break out in cold sweat all over his body. Demon King would not allow Mabel to be deceived by a human. Curve in his fear said, "Your Majesty, Demon King, please calm yourself." Demon King immediately rose from his throne and said, "I will judge the alchemist Thor Riggus myself." In a place within the kingdom of Dolgaria, a soldier informed his commander that a sacred sword was being repaired. Subsequently, the commander immediately confirmed the request for the repair of the sacred sword to the relevant division. However, much to the commander's surprise, he received news from the office division that the sword could not be repaired. The commander shouted while showing a document stating that 80% of the sacred sword had already been completed. The head of the division appeared panicked because the employee who was repairing the sacred sword had already been dismissed. The commander exclaimed, "What? The employee explained that the office division always faced budget reductions, so they always tried to discard less important things to prevent expenditures from ballooning. With a furrowed brow, the commander instructed the division to call back the employee who repaired the sacred sword. However, it turned out that they couldn't because the employee had already retired. The commander's anger intensified. The head of the division also refused to take blame because it was not his decision. The commander ordered the head of the office division to mention the name of the employee, whose name was Thor. The commander fell silent. The head of the office division continued, stating that the person's name was actually Thor Riggus. Thor was quite interesting because he always checked each item one by one and then repaired it. The commander then asked if Thor Riggus did not report on the repair items. The head of the division recalled that Thor was prohibited by the kingdom from attracting attention and interfering. He was only supposed to work normally. And for that reason, Thor never made reports on what he had done. The commander was truly furious and ordered the head of the office division to remain silent. The next day, the commander did not give up. He believed that the sacred sword could be repaired by the best alchemist in the kingdom of Dolgaria. So he immediately visited the best alchemist. However, it turned out that the response from the alchemist was that he could not repair the sacred sword. The alchemist said, repairing a magic sword isn't easy, while showing the cracks in the sacred sword. He also explained how complicated it was to repair the sword. Sadly, there was no alchemist in the kingdom with the capabilities as described. There used to be great alchemists during the hero era, but it was different now. They no longer existed. The commander became angry and ordered the alchemist to still repair the sword because the kingdom was satisfied enough with just seeing the sword looking good. The alchemist said that would mean it wouldn't be perfectly repaired. The commander remained angry because, in any case, the sword would be used for a ritual. With that statement, the alchemist reluctantly agreed to repair its appearance only, but any errors would cause problems in the future. With apprehension and resignation, the commander agrees, saying, "Fine." Mabel surprised Thor by greeting him with Thor-sama say-ah while offering a spoon filled with food. Mabel thanked Thor because he not only repaired her damaged pendant but also helped her regain her long-lost magic abilities. Thor then ate the food offered by Mabel. Suddenly, Thor asked if he could request another room from the Demon King. Mabel replied that it might be allowed, but currently, all nearby rooms were occupied. Thor felt that the items in his room were of historical significance and he was afraid of damaging them. He feared that his alchemy materials might affect these historical items. However, if it was not possible, Thor considered requesting a storage room to store these historical items. Thor finally asked Mabel to accompany him for a walk around the castle. Mabel agreed, but they left after she cleaned the room first. Suddenly, Thor thought that if there was a magic item allowed to create a workshop, he would make a storage section. He recalled that the heroes also had such items called storage skill and item box, as mentioned in the history book. It was described that the storage skill and item box could store a large number of items and automatically sort them. When he turned to the next page, he found a small-sized storage room. The description of this item was another dimension of size that has been beyond what you never know. Thor was extremely surprised to read that sentence. Thor decided to create the same item as the small-sized storage room. He used his alchemy skills to identify the materials he needed. After identifying them, he realized that he did not have dark mana. Then suddenly, the Demon King entered his room and said, "Thor Riggus, I need to talk with you." Thor was extremely shocked. Thor knelt before the Demon King. However, the Demon King instead said, "No need to kneel, I came here in secret after all. Easy now." Thor stood up after seeing the Demon King. In his mind, he thought that the Demon King was a figure of great dignity. His cloak and mask were also magic items, and he was truly powerful. With his deep voice, the Demon King thanked Thor for helping Mabel regain her magic abilities. Mabel was very important to the Demon King like a little friend, and he also thanked Thor for eliminating his fear. Thor responded with respect, explaining that he was grateful from the moment he first saw Mabel because she seemed like a caring person, which motivated him to help her in the future. The Demon King said that Thor was truly a stranger. Thor was confused and said, "Is that so?" The Demon King explained that throughout previous generations, people from the kingdom always came to the Demon King's territory. However, not only were they afraid of the residents of the Demon King's territory, but they also returned home. And Thor was truly different from the people of previous generations. He was really calm. The Demon King asked Thor if he was really planning something or if the Demon King had misunderstood. Thor responded by saying, "So you figured me out." With a loud tone and a stern face, the Demon King exclaimed, "So you were plotting something." Thor quickly handed over the book he found, the e-commerce catalog, saying, "Your Majesty, the truth is I was planning on making this thing." Thor opened the page of the book showing the picture of the small-sized storage room. He explained that the item could store 1,000 rabbits. He also invited the Demon King to attend his workshop. The Demon King became more confused by Thor's behavior and asked if it was true that Thor was planning to create something that exceeded the world of heroes. Thor confirmed. The Demon King called Thor crazy because, according to him, the world of heroes was more advanced than the Demon King's territory. Thor responded casually, saying that he was very lucky to have the e-commerce catalog from the world of heroes. For example, the foot bath used by Mabel earlier proved to be very useful and could help Mabel recover. Nodding his head, the Demon King said, "I see." Thor continues, saying that according to the Demon King, the heroes were transcendent in ancient times, and if Thor created and used the items they use, it was possible to understand the technology they used. Thor would try to understand the lives of the heroes and improve his alchemy skills so that he could create his own shop and say, "There's an alchemist here." And of course, these items could be used in the Demon King's territory. The Demon King laughed heartily at Thor's dream. He was very interested in Thor's dream, especially since the items would be used in the Demon King's territory. Then the Demon King supported Thor, allowing him to create the small-sized storage room. Thor was very happy to be supported by the Demon King. He immediately handed over the list of materials he needed. The Demon King was very surprised that Thor wanted to make it right away. Finally, the Demon King provided Thor with the materials he needed, including dark mana, and instructed Thor to make the item. The Demon King still couldn't believe that Thor would create a new item right now. Finally, he asked Mabel, and Mabel replied that nothing could stop Thor's desire. If he wanted to make the item now, he would do it right away. Mabel also said that Thor understood the needs of the residents of the Demon King's territory. And indeed, Thor said, "I have to make clothes which don't get stuck in scales for the lizardmen." The Demon King looked confused, but Mabel tried to calm him down and told him to trust Thor. Thor began to imagine the materials and a process of making the small-sized storage room. Using long, tall, and wide metal materials measuring 12 meters each, mixed with dark mana, earth mana, and wind mana, the small-sized storage room was finally completed. However, Thor did not install a drainage system for this item, whereas it was different in the e-commerce catalog, which explained that the items used by heroes had drainage systems. Thor admitted that the item he made was at a different level from what the heroes use, but it would still be useful if used by the residents of the Demon King's territory. Mabel and the Demon King were very surprised. They exclaimed, "Amazing, Thor-sama." The Demon King, who was seeing with his own eyes for the first time how skilled Thor was in creating items using his alchemy abilities, expressed his astonishment and admitted that he didn't expect Thor to be capable of all this. Thor explained to the Demon King that this item was useful for storing anything he wanted. And to check the interior of the small-sized storage room, Mabel and Thor entered the item and bid farewell to the Demon King, saying, "We'll be right back. Your Majesty, we'll see you later." Mabel and Thor arrived at the small-sized storage room. It was truly amazing. From an item with dimensions of only 12 meters in length, width, and height, they had produced a very spacious room. Mabel said she could run around as much as she wanted inside the space, shouting "Wah" to express her joy. Thor told Mabel that this was what the previous heroes used, but theirs had even unlimited storage space. And if Thor further developed his technology, perhaps the residents of the Demon King's territory would have bags with very spacious storage space. Mabel then asked if she could try the bag if it were truly made. Thor happily replied that of course Mabel could try the bag because she was important to him. Since Thor's arrival, Mabel had been the one accompanying him. Mabel felt embarrassed. She felt that whenever she was with Thor, she was always surprised by him. And she was truly happy and grateful. During their conversation, Demon King suddenly shouted, saying, "Hey Thor Riggus, what's going on there? Reply already." Thor and Mabel immediately answered the Demon King's question, reassuring him that they were fine. Finally, the Demon King decided to enter the small-sized storage room as well because he believed he needed to know whether the contents of the storage room were safe or not. When the Demon King entered the small-sized storage room, he was truly astonished. He thought the room was beautiful and spacious, just like the vast territory of the Demon King's territory. Suddenly, an SS rank rare item was detected and automatically stored in the space. It turned out that the Demon King's mask and cloak were automatically stored, and Thor said, "The true identity of Demon King Luquier."